Okay, so it's looking like a lot of you have read it but are confused. That's okay. It is a bit of a confusing one. If you haven't read it yet, please go and do so after this. Well, yeah, definitely before our next session. What I will be focusing on this evening is experimental designs because I want to draw particular attention to this because it is a bit convoluted. It's a lot of information, and there'll definitely be a section of it in your exam. So I do want to make sure that everyone understands the difference between the different types of designs, what they're used for, and what their weaknesses are. Cool. Okay, thanks for responding to the poll, guys. I'll just shut it down now. Okay, yeah, let me address this thing with that first ICE task. Yeah, I know, I'm busy chatting to the edtechs about it. There's just an issue on the system where it's not carrying over the incomplete. It's like a back end setting where it's supposed to show the gradebook that you've completed it. And it's not doing that yet, but I can see who's completed it, if that makes sense, on my end. I'm just trying to get it to pull through into the gradebook, but that will be done very soon. I should be getting feedback on it tomorrow, and if not Monday. But I will put that in an announcement probably tomorrow. So yeah, guys, don't stress. If you have completed it, I can definitely see it. And yeah, it should be pulling through. But as far as I know, the other tasks are reflecting in the gradebook normally. Okay. Alrighty, let me grab my slides. Okay, so yeah, today it's a lot of information, so I have tried to make it as engaging as possible. I made a little Kahoot for the end, and it's actually the first time I've tried to do a Kahoot like this, so it will be a fun experiment for us together. Okay, let me go and grab my slideshow first. Ah, spoilers. Yeah, yeah, well done on assignment one. Everyone did very well, generally speaking. The mean is very high, put it that way. So either the assignment was too easy, or I'm the world's greatest educator. We'll just leave that one up to the imagination. um, yeah, so yeah, well done, guys. And I want to do some kind of more like exam prep closer to the time, because it's obviously a whole different amount of pressure when you're asking exam questions and you're having to do that. It's obviously time limited and people are watching you. So yeah, I will be putting together some kind of tutorial on exam writing on this kind of thing. So look out for an announcement for that towards the end of the semester. Okay. All right, so yeah, tonight, as I've said, we are focusing on research planning and designs. Yeah, so very simply, I will go through a little bit of, what goes into research planning, although we have been touching on that throughout our module so far. I will run through the research designs, and then, yeah, we'll do questions and the little quiz. Okay, so what is a research design? At this point, I really hope that everyone has a vague idea of what a research design is, but very much simply, it is a strategy for answering your research question, okay? And the idea is obviously to use empirical data to do so. So there are specific things that you need to think about when you are designing a research project. Obviously, your overall research objectives and your approach are very important. So which design you choose is very dependent on the approach you choose, whether you do qualitative, quantitative, or a mixed method study, wholly rests on that decision. So this is why it's really important and why I've really been trying to hammer in the differences between qualitative and quantitative. is because it really is the foundation of designing any research study. And then you also need to decide on whether you're going to use primary or secondary research. So primary research is actually collecting your own data, so doing interviews, doing a survey, things like that, where you are collecting your own information and then analyzing it. And then we have types of secondary research. So what is called a systematic review is a type of secondary research. It's basically a very complicated literature review where people go and systematically follow a protocol to analyze, say, published literature on a subject. Okay, what's happening in the chat? Michaela, you can't hear anything. Oh no. Okay, so the others can hear me. So yeah, definitely, yeah. Okay. It's obviously being recorded, so I'll just carry on. Okay. Okay, so we are good on what a research design is. Any questions about this? Anything at all at this stage? Might be good to clear up now. Okay. Right, so there are three very important things that you absolutely have to understand when it comes to research design. And the first is, what is the focus of your research? There are different things that every research study focuses on. And so one is conditions. So it's like the current state of your participants. So if you are doing some kind of quick study, a case study perhaps on someone's current performance in their job, for instance, that is a condition. If you are studying, say, maybe the differences in workplace environments, where you have a very authoritative boss and a very non-authoritative boss or something like that, and you're wanting to gauge workplace performance, that would be a study on conditions. You're looking at a current state of affairs in a context. Okay, orientations is something that you probably would have come across already very commonly, researching attitudes, beliefs, and lifestyles of something. This is obviously very qualitative when you're looking to find out people's attitudes, beliefs, and the various ways that they live their lives. That is generally a qualitative endeavor. Not saying that you can't do it quantitatively. It's just that most qualitative studies will lend themselves to this type of focus. Okay, and then you have research that focuses on actions. So they can either be observed actions. So actions are products of humans, so whatever's happening, or they can be reported actions. So you could have a study that's looking at, I don't know, traffic flow during load shedding. That would be an action type focused study. Okay, just a few examples. All right, so the next one, units of analysis. We did address this in INRS, and there was that very annoying question in the summative about it. But I think most of you probably understand by now what a unit of analysis is. Very simply, it is the thing that is being researched. And there are these categories of units. So very often there are individuals that are being studied or groups of people. There are sometimes the unit of analysis is an organization. And obviously you'd come across this in organizational psychology a lot, right? When you're looking at things like workplace performance, emotional distress in the workplace, that kind of thing. That's when you're looking at the systemic issues within an organization. Quite often a social artifact is what is being studied. So that a social artifact is anything that is constructed or produced by humans. That's what that means. So any interactions, any relationships, any social justice issues, that's what a social artifact is. So that's obviously also very common within psychology. And yeah, more rarely, a period of time can obviously be a unit of analysis, and that's probably going more into anthropology and history territory. But there are more secondary research. People do reviews of the progression of a certain theory over time, for instance, and that's just when they are isolating that period of time is what's important in the study. Okay, does that make sense? I want to make sure that that makes sense because this becomes very important to variables. Yes. Yeah, Wendy, yeah, 100%. When the time period is important there for the yeah. Good example. How much rainfall in a certain time period. Okay. Oh, whoops. Should probably do the last one before I move on. Okay, and then time dimension is important because you would have come across this at some point. There are two types of studies that are dependent on the dimension of time that you're dealing with. So longitudinal studies take place over a long period of time. That's what it means, longitudinal. So, and it also means there will be more than one observation in the study. Okay, that's going to make sense in a minute when I show you the designs and the diagrams that go with that. So you measure something in the beginning of your study, you have some kind of intervention, and you measure it again 6 months later. That is a longitudinal design. Okay, a cross-sectional design, the data is collected at one point in time once. So that would be if you just send out a survey to investigate something and you collect your data and you run your stats on it and that's it, then that is a cross-sectional design. Okay, so yeah, again, it very much depends on the context of whatever research you're doing, whether it's appropriate or not to do a follow-up after a period of time. It's quite a common thing in psychology and social science in general, especially when it is an intervention type study. So like with the example in your first assessment, right? Take the people wanting to run an intervention in a school on bullying. They do their first assessment, they find out whatever they find, and then maybe they decide, oh, well, actually, let's do our intervention and let's check up again in a year. Let's see if something's changed. So that would be a longitudinal design. Okay. All right, so there are three types of research designs: pre-experimental, quasi-experimental, quasi basically meaning somewhat and not quite at the same time, and then experimental. Okay, so you'll see in the brackets here, I've got pre-experimental designs are exploratory and descriptive. Okay, so these are qualitative designs. They are suited to qualitative research when you're exploring or describing something. There is this important thing that goes on when we talk about scientific research, and that is rigor. The scientific rigor of a study, so the strength of the study, and it combines validity and reliability. Okay, and so why I mention that now is that if you do a pre-experimental design for a quantitative study, it is not very rigorous at all. And there are various reasons for that that we will be discussing as we move along. Okay, I'm just giving you an overview with this pictogram here. But yeah, just bear that in mind that if you do, it's not impossible and sometimes it's necessary. If you're just doing a quick descriptive study, for instance, you just want to get a screenshot of some statistics in a population and you do a one-shot case study on that. It's not necessarily very scientifically rigorous, but it serves the purpose for what you were doing. Okay, and then obviously it lends itself to qualitative research because the exploratory nature of qualitative research can be built into these designs. Okay, On the other end of the scale, you have experimental designs. So these are what you would traditionally ascribe the meaning of experiment to, right? You do a test, you get an answer, very scientific. And these would be the most scientifically rigorous designs in a quantitative setting. Okay, these are all quantitative designs. So you have various ones. There's a pre-test, post-test, specifically control group. Control groups belong to experimental designs. Okay, remember that. If there is a control group, you immediately know that that is an experimental design. So in an assessment, should they give you a case study and they tell you there's a control group, that would immediately tell you what you are dealing with. Okay. And then there's the complicated one, which is a factorial design, but we will get to that. Okay, experiments are explanatory. The idea is to analyze all of the variables and explain what is going on, explain the relationships. Okay, we're going to get into each of them now. Quasi-experimental fall somewhat in the middle because they don't necessarily fulfill the criteria of a pre-experimental, but also don't necessarily fall straight into the experimental rigorous category. And so there are 4 types of those designs that we will go through as well. Okay, so you will notice that there's this phrase that is consistent throughout experimental designs, and it is the pre-test, post-test design, okay, or post-test only. So the idea behind that really is that you take a measurement, if you take a measurement before an event and after an event, that is a pre-test, post-test design. So pre-test being the first observation, post-test being the second observation after you have intervened somehow, okay, after you have manipulated your variable. So I just absolutely need to make sure that everyone understands that basic concept, because depending on the type of experimental design, we're going to manipulate that idea. Everyone good on what pre-test, post-test means in general? Okay, looking like mostly thumbs up. That's good. But obviously, don't be scared to ask a question just now, should you get confused. Okay. Okay, so let's just talk about these pre-experimental designs for a minute. Again, they lend themselves to qualitative research. Can be quantitative, but just if you have a qualitative study, this is what you're going to do. Okay. So just these little diagrams are actually very useful to understand the ideas of a design. I generally understand things graphically, and I think a lot of you do too, so I thought it would be helpful. Okay, so just remember that when you see these diagrams, the X means the intervention. It means the variable you change. Okay, or the thing you are examining, for example, in a one-shot case study. So a one-shot case study is the absolute simplest of all designs. It is very much exactly what it sounds like. This would be if you are wanting to just, so qualitatively, if you are just looking at the influences of one thing on another, that thing is already happening in the world, and you are just wanting to observe it. So if I have a question that involves the influence of social media on students' attention spans, and looking at the factors involved in that, right? That is something that's already happening. I'll design a research study where I go and qualitatively interview a handful of students to see how social media fits into their lives and their studies. You know, just an example. One of my honors students is doing this. So that's a one-shot case study. You are looking at one thing at one point in time, cross-sectionally, and it's as simple as it gets, XO. Okay. So now a one group pre-test, post-test design. And the one group is important here, okay, because when you start getting to quasi and to experimental designs, you deal with more than one group. And you will see as we progress through statistics as well how that feeds in there. Okay, so let's just say we have one group of people that we are interested in looking at. This is the perfect intervention study design. Okay, so we can, let's take the bullying example because everyone's been dealing with that. Okay, so we've got a school, bullying is rife, we know this already. We're going to go in and interview everyone and figure out the current situation so that we know. Okay, then we have all the factors. We can design an intervention study, which would be X. It would be something that we implement to change the situation. So just off the top of my head, we're going to first of all introduce an anti-bullying policy at the school, whatever. Okay, we design an intervention of sorts. We let that run for 6 months. It doesn't have to be a long period of time for it to be a pre-test, post-test design. Okay, I'm just saying. And then we come back, we re-interview, get the situation, and then we can compare the before and the after of the same population, the same sample, the same group of people. That's important. Okay, it has to be the same. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. The last one is an intact group comparison. So you just really literally are it's the same thing as a one-shot case study, but you have two groups. I mean, you have, sorry, not two groups, you have two observations. So a thing happens, you come and observe it once, you wait 6 months, and you come and observe it again. You don't measure before, you are only measuring after. Does that make sense? Are we together on this? Are the words starting to make sense? Because they are just jumbly, right? It's just a bunch of words until that idea sinks in. Okay, so what are some of the weaknesses of these designs? Let's chat about it for a bit. So let's assume we are doing a quantitative study and we do one of these designs. Why would that be considered less rigorous? Anyone may come on the mic, or I don't know, the first thing that comes into your head in the chat. Thinking about the purpose of a quantitative study is to be able to generalize your findings to a greater population. Yeah, all three of you so far are correct. So Terry, there are too many elements involved. Yes, there could be any number of confounding variables. So just other variables that are around that could influence the data that you aren't even aware of. So for instance, okay, I have a slide on this whole thing, but yeah, good idea. Yeah, Wendy, 100%, they could be too similar and you wouldn't know why. So particularly with the one group pre-test, post-test design, you've got nothing to compare it to. Okay, and yeah, Jude, very possibly just not enough data. You may have to run it a few times. Hey, Katie, yeah, so the intact design is a quasi-experimental design, so we'll get there in a second. So yeah, there are two groups. Okay. Let me just progress to my slides so we can talk about these weaknesses in a bit more depth. Yeah, so the intact group design is a quasi-experimental design. And what differentiates quasi-experimental designs really from pre-experimental designs is that you can have more than one group, okay? For it to be a pre-experimental design, you have to only have one group that you're measuring. So in a pre-experimental design, it is the exact same group you measure twice. And then in quasi-experimental designs, which you'll see now, you have more than one group that you measure either once or twice or 10, okay? Okay, sure. What's confusing? What page? I've got my textbook here. 141. Okay, yeah. So this textbook in particular has put this under pre-experimental designs, but it very commonly falls under quasi-experimental designs because of the fact that there are two groups. So with an intact group comparison design, if anyone wants to follow along on page 141 of your textbook, it's exactly the same thing as a one group pre-experimental design, pre-test, post-test, but then your second group acts almost like a control group. And why that is useful is because it goes against it helps combat some of these weaknesses that we're going to talk about now. Okay, so possible weaknesses of this just simple one group pre-test, post-test designs, particularly is maturation. So we have no way of knowing really when you're only measuring one group in 2 periods of time, what exactly changes. Things can change over time naturally. People's opinions can change, whether it's due to your intervention or not. That's an example. Okay, people can acquire skills separate to your intervention, for example. Things can happen to people in their lives. In psychological research, this is a huge problem. If you're trying to measure the effect of a particular type of therapy, for instance, on depression in patients, and then people, you can't just lock people in a square room to do your experiment. And so people's lives continue. Things happen, people get sick, people lose loved ones, people lose their jobs, stress overtakes. These are obviously all factors that influence depression. This is what we know from psychology. And so you can't really stop that ethically. So that is why that is a problem for a pre-test, post-test design that doesn't have a kind of control group. So they call it an intact group comparison design because it's not necessarily a control group, because remember, for pre-test designs, they can be qualitative. So there isn't that randomization aspect. Your sampling can be purposive. So what happens is, let's say you have two groups. The first group, you do the measurement, you do the event, and then you do another measurement. And the second group, at the same time as the first group, you simply just measure them and then measure them again. Okay, they haven't received the intervention. And now this will make a lot of sense to what the Hawthorne effect is. Okay, so what you will have discovered in your textbook and in your first ICE task. That's why I made you go and look that up. So the Hawthorne effect, they discovered it. They were trying to assess productivity in a factory. And they realized that even though they were looking at one group of workers and doing an intervention with them to see if it increased their productivity, and then another group of workers, they didn't do anything with them, they just watched them. And they discovered that they also increased their productivity. It didn't just remain neutral. So they figured that it is because of the effect of the researcher. The fact that they were being watched and monitored and measured, and they knew that, meant that they, pulled up their socks and they did better. So that in essence captures what the Hawthorne effect is. Okay, so by doing a more experimental design, we can cut things like that out. Okay, but we'll get there now. Okay, cool. So some of these problems, some of them are a bit obvious, some of them are not. I haven't put proper definitions in here on purpose because I want you guys to tell me what you understand by these weaknesses. So if I say that a weakness in my study was that the test effect took effect, what would that mean? Anyone? Yeah, Wendy and Kelly and Jude are all on the right track. So the test effect happens, there's various ways that it can happen. So firstly, yeah, the participants become familiar with the material so that they just naturally then do better the second time that they do it. And there's no way of knowing that that is what made them do better or if it was your test. And then also you fatigue. I know you guys do it. It happens to students all the time. Like, how many surveys does Varsity College send to everyone? And eventually, you're like, I'm just not doing this one. So that can happen as well. You get poor retention from boredom, really, of having to do the same test twice. So it affects the results because if you are bored, you're not putting the same amount of effort into that you should naturally. Okay, so counterfactual conditions, yeah, but what if we didn't intervene? Captures that idea. So we don't know what would have happened in a simple one group pre-test, post-test design if we simply didn't intervene. And that's what the intact group comparison tries to combat. But there are obviously things that affect that as well, like the Hawthorne effect. Okay, attrition and mortality, dramatic words for basically is that people drop out of your study. And then it can skew your results because of the mean will be different because you have less people, and yeah, it can just affect your data negatively or just to skew it, which is a negative thing. You don't want your data to be skewed by anything. History can be a problem, particularly if you're looking at one-shot case studies, because it's impossible for you to know the history of all of your participants before you start. So there could be something that influences your participants' responses that is not necessarily important to your research, but it changes their responses. So an example is if you are, I don't know, just doing a qualitative study on people's experiences of watching traumatic horror movies, I don't know, yeah, on people, then if someone has experienced a traumatic incident in their past that you don't know about or that they've forgotten that is deeply repressed or something, that is obviously going to impact their answers and it's not something that you could account for. Yeah, that is a huge problem in cognitive studies because you just don't know what people have been through. And so that's why cognitive studies tend to be extremely structured. When you read a lot of cognitive psychology studies, they're all rigorous quantitative designs because, yeah, a subjective study into things like cognitive psychology, when we're trying to see how your brain works, um, is really difficult to do subjectively, obviously. Okay, instrumentation is an interesting one when you have a research team and it's not just you doing your experiments on your own. Is that if one person, say, does an interview and then the next person does the follow-up interview with the same person, it could be different because that person could have different affect towards the participant, which would influence their responses. The participant would be possibly, I don't know, uncomfortable with the second person for whatever reason, you can just see that it's, yeah, possible that that kind of thing could influence the interview. And yes, that is why you would structure your questions as much as you can, but there are still outlying confounding variables that you can't control. Yeah, like if participants just don't like somebody, if you just get the creep factor from someone, for example, you're going to be far less open talking to them than you would if you really clicked with the first person that you spoke to. So yeah, it's one of those things with qualitative research that you always just have to bear in mind. I think we've run through, okay, regression towards the mean. So this is an important concept in statistics that we'll go over as well. But there's always a chance that your data is influenced by chance. It's a mathematical standard that chance is always an option. And so error is always an option. And so when you don't have a control group, it's really almost impossible to tell whether the first measurement you took was just by chance different than if you had done it the previous Tuesday. So that's really what that means as a weakness. Yeah, are we all good with this? Okay, let's get into the slightly more complicated ones. So quasi-experimental, you're now dealing with two groups and a lot of comparison happens. Okay, so a contrasted group design really means that you are doing tests on different groups and seeing the difference. So you are trying to get to groups that you know are going to be dissimilar. The example they give you in your textbook is actually a very good one. They want to look at the influence of, well, I suppose the impact, because we're doing quantitative things, of parents' education on their children's academic performance. So group A, they have would be the higher educated parents, and group B would be parents that don't have any tertiary education, for example. And so you know that these results are going to be different, right? Just based on previous assumptions and your literature review. And so you would compare initially group A to group B just to see the differences. You would compare so you do a test on group A, you do the test on group B, you compare that. And then you take the differences and you compare that. Okay, so you're basically just comparing all of the differences that occur between group A and group B. And yeah, it would just help you explain that variable of the education of the parents. Yeah, it's a pretty common design for when you are looking at gender differences in something. A classic one, gender differences in sport performance. Or yeah, that kind of thing. That is exactly what you would use this for. Well, that's what you could use it for. You could be more complicated about it. Okay, so similar weaknesses here. Anyone have any ideas? Quickly. So this isn't a pre-test, post-test design. This is a one-shot design. You can turn it into a pre-test, post-test. So yeah, so it's the same test. It just means Group A's results and Group B's results, Jude. So let's say you have a teacher. This is what the example I think in one of the textbooks that you have is that the teacher wants to know how his students are going to do in a maths test, and he's curious to see if the ones with educated parents do better than the ones with uneducated or higher educated parents. Put it that way. Yeah, it could very much be quite subjective because there's no control group. There's no really anything to even make sure that the test itself is very reliable in that example. Yeah, differences could already exist anyway between your groups. It's not accounting for variables like just general IQ of the children. Yeah, factors within them. Okay. Okay, so cohort designs, you have the straight up normal cohort design or you have a pre-test, post-test design. It is really the same as the pre-experimental ones. It's just that you are using two groups and you know that they have a shared characteristic and you're wanting to see it over time. So, well, you can use two groups. You can do it with as many groups as you want. It can be one group. It's just people tend to do it with one because then they can compare cohorts together as well as the effect over time. Okay. So a cohort, just in case anyone is not understanding what that is simply a group of people that have shared characteristics. So you guys are a cohort. You are a cohort of students at Varsity College in the second semester in the research psychology module in 2023. You're a cohort because you share those characteristics, right? You have a common experience. So, for example, cohort designs are useful if we wanted to see your guys' performance over time. If I wanted to go and run some statistics, like comparing your INRS scores to your REPR scores, for instance, that's a cohort design. I'm looking at a similar group and looking for the differences that time makes. And obviously, whatever intervention makes, in this case, it would be, more education. Yeah, so cohort designs are most commonly longitudinal, but it is obviously entirely possible to do it as a one-shot cross-sectional design. You're just looking at a group of people and yeah, just trying to study their characteristics. But if you're trying to compare something, then it will be over time. Okay, time series design. Very similar, same thinking. It's exactly the same concept as a pre-test, post-test. It is a pre-test, post-test design, but the difference is that you have multiple readings on either side of the event so that you can try and take into consideration the effect that time has in the experiment. So that's trying to rule out maturation effects because you can get a better average before and after the event. Does that make sense? So it is more rigorous than doing a simple pre-test, post-test design mathematically. Yeah, absolutely. You can measure regression. Okay, let's do the experimental designs. Okay, so yeah, again, as soon as you see the word experimental, there's a control group and there is mathematical randomization. That is very important to these designs. Okay, so when we say random in maths, it means truly random. Like there is no control that the researcher has at all. Okay, we don't have time to go over sampling tonight. That's why I haven't done it. We're going to do it next time. And I will talk more on randomization then with quantitative sampling. But the idea is that you mathematically randomly assign groups. So simple random sampling would be, say you take every seventh child in the class on the attendance register and you put them in group A. And then you take every sixth child in the class and you put them in group B, okay? It's randomly, or you do every first one in group A, every second child, and you split them completely randomly so that you have no control over that. And that is a very, very important concept that we're going to deal with in our next statistics class, okay? So the control group simply means they do not receive the intervention, they don't experience the event, nothing happens to them, you just measure them at the beginning and you measure them at the end. Okay, the treatment group or just the other group, okay, gets whatever intervention it is in the middle and you measure them before and you measure them after. So you'll start to see that you can stack designs, right? So you could do a pre-test, post-test time, what did we call it? Like a timeline design, because then you can do multiple readings before and multiple readings after and still have a control group. So this kind of thing is probably mostly common and generalized in medical research. Like if you watch Grey's Anatomy, they're always doing trials and they make it seem like it's so easy to do that and they can write a research paper overnight. Ridiculous. But anyway, the control group is really important because you have to compare your results to something. Otherwise, you'll have absolutely no idea whether your intervention did anything or not. Yeah, clinical trials, absolutely. Telepathy, same page, Sorrel. Yes, Kelly, randomization does distinguish experimental design. It can't be an experimental design without that element of randomization. Yeah, Jamie, I'm scrolling up to the questions. Yeah, you can do any design either longitudinally or, well, except for the one shot, obviously, because that's one shot, that's cross-sectional. But yeah, you can do any of these longitudinally. The pre-test, post-test is a longitudinal design. Okay. So we've been dealing a lot with the pre-test, post-test design, but what about post-test only designs? So this means that you just don't take a measurement before you do your intervention. You only measure it after. Okay, this has obvious weaknesses, like how do you know what changed if you didn't measure it before? But it obviously has applications, particularly in social sciences. Can anyone maybe think of an example of a post-test only design? You measure it against the control group. I'll tell you where to look in your textbook if you have it in front of you. Page 150. Yeah, so this kind of thing comes into action when you are trying to measure, say, a problem. Okay, the example given in your textbook is when you're trying to measure absenteeism problems. So as a boss in a workplace, you know that absenteeism is a problem. And so you think, well, let me design an intervention. What can I do? Can I give everyone an ice cream if they come to work on time? And then you can only do a post-intervention measurement. And then you do it on the first floor of people and not on the second floor of people. And then, yeah, the second floor of people are your control group, right? If I wanted to figure out why I only have 13 of 51 students here tonight, I could do something like that. Okay. If I could magically offer you all 10% bonus for coming to collabs, do you think that maybe attendance would increase dramatically? Something like that, okay. Can't do that, nope, talk to National. But it would be cool. Cash incentives, woof, running into ethical problems there. Okay, cool, but we're understanding the concept there. Okay, let's deal with factorial designs. This looks intimidating. Let's just acknowledge that. Okay, it's the most complicated design because you have more than one independent variable. In every other design, you have one independent variable. Let's go over again what independent and dependent variables are. Could someone please tell me what an independent variable is? Yes. Okay, so the independent variable is, yeah, okay, look, the dependent variable is what you are measuring. It's what you want to find out. The independent variable is the thing that doesn't change. It is the other variable that you are measuring against, right? So let's just take the first half of the block on the right for this example. Just pretend that the left-hand side of caffeine doesn't exist. Just look at the clock, okay? So we wanted to look at, well, let's say that only one here exists. So if you wanted to see if the time of day affects someone's mood, let's say, then the time of day, you have the morning and the evening, or afternoon, and then you're wanting to see whether the morning or the afternoon there's a difference. Okay, so the thing when you have two independent variables is just when you're trying to combine these things that you're wanting to look at. So for this example, what they're trying to figure out is that, so does someone's performance or say mood or something have any effect when it's either morning and they've had some caffeine, or it's afternoon and they've had some caffeine. Obviously, that's not like it would be like one cup of coffee or something, okay? Or if it's the morning and they've had no caffeine, and then you can compare if it's the afternoon and they've had no caffeine. Yeah, so if any of you have done biology in high school, this would be kind of a familiar table when you're doing genetics and you have X and you have Y, and then you have X, Y, and you have Y, Y, and etc. Okay, there's four options when you have two independent variables. Okay, I know that this is going to be confusing. Okay, yeah, so this kind of thing will come into statistics when you do a test called an ANOVA. That is for when you have more than one independent variable. Okay, so just if you are reading ahead, that's when that's going to happen. But what you need to understand tonight is that you use a factorial design when you have more than one independent variable. You can do it with more than two, okay? I just kept the example simple. You can do a 2 by 3. So you could measure if someone's had some caffeine or no caffeine, either in the morning, the afternoon, and you could add the evening. That would be a 2 by 3 design. You see how there are different levels within the independent variable. Okay, cool. Okay, there's 2 minutes left. I wanted to do the cool Kahoot. So if you guys, it will literally take you 2 minutes. So if you want to just stick around for that, let's do that quickly. Okay. I think this is how this works. I think I need to stop sharing. It's loading. Okay, it's loading the pin. Okay, now I need to share the screen. Bear with me, guys. I age 40 years when I try to do any things like this. um, oh, there's music. Okay, so if you have the Kahoot app, if you have other educators that use this, you can go onto it or just go onto www.kahoot.it and put in the pin. Or just scan the QR code there. You guys choosing your avatars because it's hilarious. Yes. Okay, we've got 8 people so far. Are the rest of you trying to join? Just let me know. Oof, the competitiveness. I need to up the stakes. Okay, so I will bear in mind next time that we need to obviously have time for everyone to join these things. Good, good, I'm learning. The stress! If you were listening, it's extremely easy. Okay, can I start? Is anyone still frantically trying to join and really wants to take part? Really not super long. Okay, let's go! I need to go back to this page. You've got 7 seconds. Okay, so the 4 of you that said exploratory, you're not wrong, but you weren't the most right either. Okay, I thought that was a rude one to put points to because of it was tricky. Let's go. Okay, explanatory. Before you ask, I have no idea what their scoring system is. Oh, you guys having issues? Okay, control group designs increase scientific rigor of study, correct. Sorry guys, next time I'll plan for enough time to work out the tech issues. Ooh, it's true. Oh, guys. Okay, last one. Correct. Factorial design. It was a sneaky question because factorial design is an experimental design. So half a mark to those of you that said experimental. Okay, remember, I'm a trickster when I give you quizzes. You need to pick the most correct answer. Who won? Who is S? Sorrel, I imagine. Woo! Okay, who is king? Reveal yourself. Nice. Okay, well done, guys. Cool, so that was fun. I think what I'll do next time is like build my slideshow into it so it's quicker and everything. Okay, thanks everyone. I hope that you learned something this evening. I will see you next week for our second stat session. Okay, bring your calculators. We can all try and beat Sorrel's calculation times. Okay. Yeah, Michaela, you got a question?
Good evening. I was just wondering if it was possible for you to give us a few more of the like activity we have in our book. If you can give us a few more of those just for extra
For
practice,
statistics.
because I took math lit and I'm struggling. Yeah, for the statistics we did last week.
Yeah,
Thank
okay.
you so
Yeah,
much.
sure. I can compile some for that.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Oh, no problem. Enjoy evening all. Enjoy the rest of load shedding for those of you in my position.